Okay, Fine Arts and Daily Living Music 239. We're going to be talking about today two-dimensional art. Two-dimensional art, or rather some concepts of two-dimensional art that you'll need in order to access these types of artwork a little bit more readily. Here you have in front of you what? What is it? Yes, I'm talking to you. What is this? Alright, hopefully you've come up with at least one thing that you think this is. A lot of people have come up with different things, everything from a whale to a goldfish, the snack, half of a goldfish, to a road through a mountain, a hill road in the hills or something like that. Some people say that it's a woman laying on her side. There's a lot of things that people have come up with. Alright, but the main thing is, remember we talked about that when you're encountering an artwork, one of the first things you have to do is identify what it is that you're dealing with, what it is that you're supposed to be accessing, right? Okay, now let's start to apply our terminology, which is the next thing that was on that particular list. Yes, I said list. You have abstract versus concrete. What would you say? Would you say this is abstract or concrete? I would tend to say this was abstract because it doesn't seem to readily identify itself as anything. We can say that it might look like this or reminds us of that, but it doesn't really give us that easy access, that easy association with anything. So I would say that this was more abstract than concrete. What about, does this give you a feeling of tension or of release, a feeling of motion or of calm or at restedness? I think that most people would agree that this is less motion, that this is more calm, more static, that it's just there. It gives you more of a feeling of release rather than tension. What about, would you say that this is dissonant or consonant? I think most people would agree that this is pretty much consonant. Okay, it's relatively easy on the senses. All right, let's move on to the next one. Please keep this one in mind as you're looking at it, but let's move on. This, compared to the previous one, would be definitely dissonant, especially compared to the other one. This is harsher on the senses than the first one. This would definitely give you more of a feeling of motion, of tension, compared to the other one. What is this? You probably were able to grab onto a little bit quicker something to identify this as, whether it was mountains or whether it was a stock market report, or whether it was bad teeth. No, hopefully you didn't say that. Or maybe an EKG monitor. Somebody in the health professions might have thought that. So we would probably say that this is a little bit more concrete than the previous one. But definitely that feeling of motion, definitely more of a feeling of dissonance. And now understand that if we're able to get this just from one line, how complex your analysis of a full-fledged painting could actually be. A lot of times we might think about, in the movies, how can somebody kind of sit there and look at one painting for an hour? What are they looking at? Or how could they go back to the museum and look at that same painting yet again? Well, if we're spending this time with just one line, how much more so? And we're just dealing with a line. We're not even talking about what is it speaking to us. Is it talking about world peace? Is it talking about, whatever it may be talking about? Okay? Moving on. Alright, here we basically have a pyramid. I think most people would agree. I think everybody would say it's concrete. I think it gives a feeling of rest or of stability or release, as opposed to tension and motion, because we look at that as just kind of sitting there, very strong looking, right? I think everybody would say it's relatively consonant because it doesn't make you uneasy in any way. It's just boom, there it is. Keep that in mind, and I want you to look at really what you're looking at. Yeah, what I said. Alright, here we go. Look at this one. Compared to the previous one, this would give most people a feeling of instability. It would give a feeling of motion. You may or may not get a similar level of consonance or dissonance, and I think that if you had to choose between abstract and concrete, comparing this to the previous one, you might say that it was abstract, but in and of itself, relatively concrete. It's not really that hard to access. The interesting thing is that we are looking at here the same number of lines that we looked at on the other one, the pyramid that was sitting on its base, as it were, but just because of our perception and our frame of reference, we look at this one and we look at it as something that might be about to tip over, when actually it's just a two-dimensional image. And see, those are the things that we as artists manipulate, the elements that are manipulated via techniques to evoke an intellectual and or emotional response from the recipient of the artwork. Okay, so just doing those few things, just turning it around or flipping it this way or that way, gives a whole nother feeling, and we're counting on being able to get that out of the person that's watching it, listening it, or however it is that they're experiencing the art. Okay? Alright, moving on. Okay, now this particular slide, image, what is it? Some of you may have said 3 buildings. Some of you may have said garage door. Some of you may have said it's the windows on storefronts. Some of you may have, again, said teeth. Somebody actually said that. Believe it or not, somebody today that was watching me do this said that this looked like an elephant's foot. If you can see it, the nails and everything. That was like the first time anybody had ever said that. So, anyway, one thing that this, if you consider this, the blue shaded area, to be the image, then you might have thought that those 3 boxes were windows. Right? Whereas if you thought that the blue area was non-image, you may have thought you were looking at 3 buildings or anything else, where those 3 boxes are the actual image and everything else is just air or space or background and things of that nature. So there's the difference between this being the image or non-image and this. Okay? And a lot of times people will play upon that as well. Again, as an artist, how skillful I am at manipulating the various elements that are involved have a lot to do with what kind of reaction I'm able to get, what I'm able to speak, what I'm able to communicate. It's kind of like a rapper being able to skillfully use his conjugations and how he puts together phrases and things like that, his phraseology, if you will. That has a lot to do with how you receive it and what the stimulus and response is as you encounter that particular artwork, right? Okay. Let's look at another concept here. Not that concept. That's the same thing. Implied line. Implied line. That blue shaded area, if it were indeed non-image, we get the feeling of a line being there. And a lot of times, especially in more abstract art, you'll use something that is there to imply something out of something that's not there. And that probably sounds a little bit confusing right now, but as we see it in artworks, I'll be sure to point it out if it is that we see it. But the idea of just implying something, it's kind of like if I go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Your mind probably already supplied the last do because at the top, because I set you up for that. Alright? Alright, this. Closed composition. As it says in the book, a closed composition is where the elements within the frame, and the dark black box is the frame, the elements that are within the composition tend to keep your eye in the frame. Like everything that you look at kind of guides your eye back in. You're not really considering what might be outside of the frame. That's closed composition. And then open composition, which is the opposite, where you look at it and your eye is actually led towards the edge of the frame and possibly beyond what might be outside of this particular frame. Okay? And we'll see that manifested in some of the paintings and some of the images that we're going to look at. All right.